Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unveiling the Royals, the life and legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. Delighted that you're joining us this evening after what's been a very momentous day in royal world. My name is Camilla Tominey. I'm the Associate Editor of the Daily Telegraph. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to be discussing Diana's life and legacy on what would have been her 60th birthday today. We're also going to look at her impact on the royal family and subsequent events. And of course, when we do that, we cannot avoid a discussion about Megxit and what's happened to the royal family over the last 18 months and what impact it might have had on the future of the monarchy. Obviously, I can't do that by myself. So without further ado, let me first introduce our first guest. And I'm so delighted both of these people who were our top choice for this event both said yes, because they are absolutely quality guests with unique and extraordinary insight actually into Princess Diana's life and legacy. And the first of those is Tina Brown. Tina barely needs any introduction whatsoever, but I'm going to make sure that I get it absolutely right here by describing her as an award-winning journalist, editor and author. She was given the Commander of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen for her services to journalism. Tina has authored, as I'm sure all of you know, the best-selling biography of the Princess of Wales, the Diana Chronicles, which is just the ultimate book, frankly, on Diana's life. She's got a new book coming out next year, The Palace Papers, which is a sequel, if you like, and it's being published by Penguin Random House in the spring of 2022. So that's something to look forward to. And the book will cover what's happened effectively in the House of Windsor since Princess Diana's death, so taking in the last 20 years. So we'd like to welcome Tina onto the stage now. And also joining me for tonight's discussion is the eminent historian Andrew Roberts. Andrew is a historian and visiting professor at the War Studies Department at King's College London. As NBC's royal correspondent in London, he covered the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, for that US network. And he's the author of 15 books, including The Royal House of Windsor. I also worked with Andrew on NBC when we covered the royal wedding together in 2011 of William and Kate and subsequent royal events. Delighted that you could both be with us. Welcome.
Delighted
to this event on a historic day of the long-awaited unveiling of the statue of Princess Diana. So let's kick off, first of all, Tina, with first reactions to this. You've obviously seen the footage and the imagery of this statue. What did you make of it?
Well, it's very much not the dewy-eyed Diana, is it? I mean, it's quite intimidating. Very much a kind of don't mess with me Diana, I would say, in imagery, which is quite an interesting and surprising way to look at her. You know, I think it's obviously the boys wanted to show her as a woman of authority, power, and perhaps they like the notion of her sort of facing down the world, because I think that's rather the woman that they most admire in this particular moment of time. And of course, adding the children is very much Diana, tough but tender. So the most important thing, I guess, is that this has reflected the mother they wanted to show. And
yeah,
people will not quite know what they think about it probably for many years, actually.
In the statement that Kensington Palace released earlier, they talked about having the children around her to represent the fact that she appealed to generations and there was a universality about her work, which I think we can agree with. Andrew, it's never easy, is it, to immortalize figures in history in bronze? But when you are one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century, the most photographed woman on earth, and somebody who died at 36 and therefore is always immortalized as a youthful figure, it's difficult to get statues right, isn't it?
I think it is, but at least with this one, it does actually look like her. It's not one of those statues where the sculptor is trying to make some ultra-modernistic statements. Maybe I'm being conservative in my view of statues, but I do like it when they actually look like the person they're supposed to, and this one does.
Do you think it's significant, Tina, that the brothers have clearly decided not to capture their mother in her sort of 1980s heyday, but they made the point in the press release that they wanted to capture her later on in her life? I think when they said that she was most confident in her humanitarian work and in her position. So effectively, they were saying that they wanted to capture her post-divorce. Do you think that's significant?
Well, I do really. By the way, it's actually worth noting that William is now 4 years older than his mother was when she died, and Harry's actually the same age, which is really incredible to think about how young she was. That the boys are now older than she is. I think obviously that was also the age when they most remember her last. This was the age that she was in those last years where they were so close to her post-divorce, because they'd seen her through so much sort of pain and tribulation. And also was probably that brief time, that last year particularly, was, I think, one of her more happy times. She was finally free of it all. She was finally divorced. She felt that she was facing the world in the way she wanted to. And I think they probably want to remember her that way.
Expand on that a bit more, Tina, because I know from reading your book, The Diana Chronicles, that you actually saw the princess shortly before she went on holiday and, of course, tragically died in Paris in 1997. Tell us a bit about what kind of place she was in. I remember you telling me that she was absolutely beautiful and looked Amazonian, I think was the way you described. Well, but where was she at that point in her life, do you think?
Stunningly sort of in control of where she wanted to be. I remember sitting in the restaurant in New York with Anna Wintour of the Vogue, and we were together having lunch with her that day. She'd come over for the auction of her dresses at Christie's in July 1997, and she strode through that restaurant, every head swiveling, in this lime green Chanel suit with the heels on, which we always forget how tall she was, and the stunning sort of supermodel height, and then these unbelievable sort of, limpid pools of feeling, which were her blue eyes, and this peach colored skin. And she was just unbelievably beautiful. It was shocking. One expected her to be beautiful. We all knew what she looked like in flesh, so much more beautiful. But the interesting thing about her, I think, I remember her divorce lawyer, Anthony Julius, saying to me, never met a person more under construction than Diana was at all times. That you could see, as he said it, the sort of almost like the wheels of, the wires and all the rest of it underneath this endless sort of reconstruction she was doing of herself and her sort of evolution of herself. And you could see that when I met her, because she went very quickly between all these different Dianas. She started by, you felt you were obviously being a little bit wooed and spun. We were both two editors, and she clearly wanted to see us for her own sort of positioning. But also she has immediately established this sort of pool of intimacy where she was talking about all the most sort of close held things in her life, her feelings for Charles, her tremendous regret that the marriage had not worked out. She kept returning to those feelings of regret. And then her sense of loneliness, which she talked about how the boys were going to Balmoral and how that was always a very difficult time for her in the summer, that she was left alone. So she went from that, and then she switched to being very confident about what she now wanted to do, which was really to take all of her humanitarian work and partner with a TV channel, she put it, to create these kind of humanitarian documentaries, which would then become something which was really, amplifying her message, and that the funds of that would go to philanthropy. And what I'm struck is it's kind of, in a sense, what William and what Harry and Meghan have been talking about doing, but with the sort of crucial difference that in her case, she always saw it as being a philanthropic humanitarian exercise where all the funds would not be for herself, but would be for the cause itself. But it was very well thought out. She was very media savvy. That was the thing I got too. This is a woman who really understood how to make the modern media work for the things she cared about. Very sophisticated about that.
Andrew, what were your recollections of her? I know you met her on several occasions. And I suppose she's remembered, isn't she, like all great historical figures, as rather complicated.
Yes, that's right. I used to meet her socially at lunches and dinners occasionally. She actually sent flowers to my wife when we had our first baby 2 months before she died, and she once taught me to curtsy. I was having a conversation with her, and she said that an awful lot of men curtsied to her out of panic, basically, when they were in long lines. They saw their wives curtsy, and then the man would curtsy, and he'd of course be photographed curtsying, because they always used to have photographers everywhere, and she had to keep a straight face. So I asked whether or not I could have a go at it, and she gave me 8 out of 10, which I'm very proud of. She had, as Tina was saying, she had the capacity to make you feel you the only person in the world. She had that sort of miner's headlamp of charm that meant that you and only you were interesting and important in the room, and it made you feel just unbelievably special. And that, I think, was part of her charisma. Other people have it, Bill Clinton's always said to have it. Lots of major world figures had it, but she undoubtedly had it, and had it in spades.
Interesting questions just come in here from Claire. Brilliant analysis. She was so savvy, but then why not a good student, Tina? I mean, this sense, I suppose, of people sometimes being in two minds about her. On one hand, she's very vulnerable. She has these enormous obstacles in her marriage to overcome very early on. And yet we can't deny the fact that she was also an arch manipulator of the press and her own public image, can we, Tina?
Well, no, but you see, this is what was interesting about her, made her so compelling in a sense. She wasn't book smart, that's for sure. I mean, she got 1 O level or something. I mean, I think Harry's taken after her in that regard. I mean, not book smart, but this amazing kind of emotional quotient where she could pick up the vibes of everybody and every, in a room very, very quickly, which frankly is a far more useful trait in life than book learning, actually, because she could read a room better than anyone one knows, and in a way where she would pick up the needy person and immediately want to go and help them in a way that was really genuine. Nothing phony about that. I saw it enough times to see this was a woman of genuine empathy and really wanted to make people feel better about themselves. I think she learned very smart about the media. I mean, the fact is that, they were a part of her life from the age of 19, and she had a natural instinct with her sort of acute understanding of how the world worked as opposed to learning, that these people were going to always be very important to her. They hounded her when she was just a child, really dating Charles, and she immediately charmed them. Diana was not the one to kind of complain about the press in those courtship days. She actually used to give them, hand out chocolate to them and open the window and say, I do hope you're not feeling too cold, when they were standing outside her house hounding her. It's kind of brilliant. They all fell in love with her. So she understood that. And it was a very wonderful trait that she had that. Of course, later, when things turned very toxic in the marriage, it became, as far as the royals were concerned anyway, a very toxic asset, because it meant that she was always ahead of them, because they'd never understood the media the way that Diana did.
Andrew,
sorry, can I just add on something to that, which is, of course, that we don't really want our royals to be book smart. We've never had particularly intellectual royals. The cleverest royals perhaps were Charles I and George III, both of whom were disastrous in their own ways. We want people who are like us rather than people who are sort of blindingly brainy. And I mean, Elizabeth I was a great monarch and also hugely intelligent, but by and large, it's not brains that you're looking for. It's character and personality and decency and duty and all of those other good things.
But Andrew, I'm interested in your view on how she should be contextualized in modern royal history. I mean, on one hand, there's this sense, well, she's the most photographed woman on earth, and she has this kind of, I don't mean this unpleasantly, but almost lowbrow following. And yet at the same time, her impact on the latter half of the 20th century in terms of being an icon of that era seems enormous. I mean, are we overstating it? The reaction to this statue today indicates that she's a really significant figure in recent modern royal memory, isn't she?
I think so, because of the extraordinary reaction that the British people had in 1997 when she died. There are so many people, including now historians, who say that it was a pivotal moment historically. It was the moment that the British people lost their stiff upper lip, for good or for ill, started crying, bringing flowers in cellophane wrappers in their tens of thousands to commemorate a woman who most of them hadn't met before. And so it really was a sort of a change in British society, a change in the way that Britons felt about themselves. And of course, that has actually very little to do with Princess Diana herself, but everything to do with her tragically early death.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it, Tina? The impact that she had in life and how it was magnified in death. I mean, I think we do have a different royal family today because of her influence in life, but also her influence in death, if that makes sense. Tina, do you agree with that?
I do. And I mean, to Andrew's point, which is absolutely right, I mean, you only had to look at the diversity of the crowd that came out to mourn Diana, and it was stunning. It was a sort of face of the new England, which people hadn't really until that moment looked at and said, my God, here there are people, you know, white, black, wearing hijabs, wheelchairs, people who bringing their children, their disabled children, that, you know, it was this amazing picture of a really diverse England. That Diana, who was, after all, you know, a very well-bred girl who was a princess, magically had come to be the sort of patron saint of, which was really, I think, a wonderful thing that she was able to do. Of course, her early death has forever sort of frozen her in that particular moment of time, which is always going to be, you know, iconic in the same way that, you know, Marilyn Monroe, JFK, I mean, Elvis, I mean, the people that one thinks of as being the massive sort of celebrity icons of the world all died young, is the truth. So you're fixed there, of course, in a way that makes it very special, you know, in terms of your imagery. But she, you know, Diana just, I think, stood for such humanity. And I think she did introduce the sort of concept, really, that, you know, caring is sharing, if you like, you know, that because she had revealed through the Morton book the agonies that she went through, and, you know, the eating disorders, the pain, all the jealousy, all the things that she felt, she ripped off the band-aid, as it were, of sort of the stiff upper lip, if I can badly mix all my metaphors here, and sort of revealed her humanity. And so that when she talked about bulimia, for instance, publicly, and called it my, you know, my shameful friend, I mean, it was immensely powerful, and people really sort of connected with that. So she gave people permission to talk about their pain, if you like. And I think that's why she was such an important figure.
Andrew, do you agree with that sense that we are actually always going to latch on? I mean, you're a scholar of Churchill and you've written books about Napoleon as well, to these characters that are fundamentally quite flawed and fragile and vulnerable, and yet still seem to achieve these astonishing things. I mean, is that the point of the human connection with these historical figures?
I think so, yes, absolutely. I mean, there are very few people in history that don't have some kind of clay feet. I think that Tina's absolutely right. There's the sort of James Dean thing that if you die young, your clay feet are less likely to be seen than if you live to be 95. But also, I think it's important to remember that, especially in that Panorama interview, she did very dangerously undermine the royal family. Her statement that she didn't believe that Prince Charles would ever become King of England was a profoundly dangerous and difficult and nerve-wracking moment, really, because it seemed to essentially set up a rival court. And that is always very dangerous politically and historically. So, you know, there were things that she did, as well as these wonderful philanthropic things that she did, that were also extremely dangerous to an institution that matters a great deal in this country.
Well, talking about sort of dangerous interventions that may have rocked the monarchy, Tina, simple question. Would Megxit have happened without Princess Diana? In the sense that, obviously, we know that Prince Harry is on Earth because of Princess Diana, but the idea of her being a royal rebel, and we've heard Harry, haven't we, talk about this idea of keeping his mother's legacy alive, talking about how he's got a lot of his mother in him, almost as a justification for him breaking free. I mean, how much do you think she has influenced, I suppose, to put it bluntly, her son's choice of bride and then the choices they've made subsequently?
Well, there are two different responses in a sense. In the sense, yes, obviously Harry very much models himself on his Spencer mother, who was about feeling, about following her heart, about, you know, breaking free. But he may have also not absorbed some of her other lessons. I think myself that Diana would have, you ask if Megxit would have happened, not in the way that it happened. Let's put it this way. I think that Diana would have been thoroughly supportive of Harry's desire to get the heck out of there, which she certainly wanted to do, and particularly as a second son. But at the same time, I think she would have given him a lot of advice about how to better achieve what he wanted to achieve. I mean, don't let us forget that Diana watched how Fergie did her divorce and thought to herself, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be stiffed by the royal family and left with nothing. She went off and she hired an extremely shrewd lawyer who was outside the royal establishment, who got her 17 million pounds, which was more than anyone had ever gotten out of the royal family, and which Prince Charles to this day moans about. Harry, on the other hand, sort of plunged out of this thing in a way that was utterly chaotic, really, and in doing so made himself a horrible bad deal, which he's still trying to kind of put to rights. I think Diana would have said, whoa, think about it. It's not as easy as you think to cut loose, because she found cutting loose very challenging. When after her separation, she actually found it, she felt the cold wind of when you're not inside that royal circle. You may not like that royal palace sort of claustrophobia, but when you're out of it, it's also very challenging. You no longer have that structure. You no longer have that palace machine. You no longer have that palace protection. All of the things that you can have. When you're out of it, you're just on your own, mate. You're just another celebrity scrambling to get your way through the world. And she found it actually quite challenging. And at times, I mean, Patrick Jeffson, her private secretary, was a genius at sort of brokering this kind of new world of hers that she tried to do afterwards. So I think she would have said to Harry, it's not as easy as you think. What's the money going to be? How much, who's financing this? Like, how are you going to live? You don't think you can be royal and not royal, because Diana found when she wanted to do these big royal trips and things, when she'd left the royal family, they wanted nothing to do with it and they could nix her. She wanted to do, the Dimbleby lecture at Edinburgh. All of a sudden, it melted away. She wanted to go and console bomb victims at Warrington, the Warrington bombing, and IRA victims. No, it was Prince Charles who was going to go. And she was told, no. She was told, you can't go to John Smith's funeral. So she found that it was very inhibiting. And I think she would have said to Harry, you get those terms written out cold. And I think that she was the advisor he lacked.
I think, sorry, one other thing. I think, of course, a lot depends on how Diana would have got on with Meghan. I mean, because if they didn't get on, then I think she would have been the mother-in-law from hell for Meghan, because obviously Harry's tremendously close to her. And I don't think that he would have married Meghan had she raised so much as an eyebrow. He didn't want to marry somebody his mother didn't like. But who's to say, whether or not they would have got on? I think it's also quite important to remember that she always was going to have a kind of foot in the court, in that she was the mother of somebody who was going to be King of England, and with her being so much younger than Prince Charles, she was going to be a king mother at some stage. And so however much they froze her out, and Tina's absolutely right about the way that she was frozen out, ultimately she was always going to have a foot in the door to get back in again.
Also on that note, Andrew, I was going to ask you with regard to the Cambridges. I mean, a lot is said, particularly by Harry himself, about how he's inherited a number of his mother's traits. But equally, there's a sense that Prince William is cut from Diana's cloth. That dedication to duty, and to be fair to her, yes, of course, there was a lot said and done in the Martin Bashir interview, but at no point ever did Diana appear to disrespect the Queen.
No, of course not, absolutely. And I think this ultimately the sense of duty is something that comes from the Queen and the late Prince Philip. There's very much this sense that that's what the royal family do, and to give them their due, of course, also Prince Charles and Camilla they undertake hundreds and hundreds of royal engagements every year, many of which we don't know about and don't see. So yes, it's an essential part really of that, and if you don't have it, then you shouldn't be in the royal family anyway, because it is, a lot of it is extremely boring, hard work, frankly.
Tina, do you think that the sons have learnt the right lessons or the wrong lessons when it comes to sort of reliving Diana's legacy? They kept her charitable work alive, but for Harry particularly, hasn't this idea of being a royal rebel been quite damaging, not least to his popularity in the UK?
Well, I think, that Diana's major gift to her sons was a sense of being relatable, if you like. I hate the word, but, guys who grew up being able to, William can high five at the soccer match and he means it, you know. So she was able to raise young men who were really part of the human race that we understand and who we can relate to and we think of as modern. It was one of her great traits. But of course, you know, in having those traits, they also are of this generation. And I think it's enormously hard for this generation, in fairness to them, to be constrained by the sort of the royal sense of who they should be in this atmosphere of total scrutiny all the time. I mean, you know, our admiration for the Queen is sort of undimmed but at the same time, she never had to go through the kind of scrutiny that these other generations, her subsequent generations have had. I mean, Harry and William were both kind of hounded by hackers and, you know, and the press and all the rest. It's been just horrific for them, actually. William has handled it differently to Harry. William was always this very cautious temperament. In fact, Diana used to call him my wise old man. And she used to confide in him almost like a husband. You know, when he was in 12, 13, 14, she told him all her problems. He knew everything about her life. She really lent on William in a way that was kind of an extraordinary relationship, actually. So he's always been a little wise beyond his years, William, and has had that sort of that caution, which is both temperamental and I think born of his very solemn understanding of his duty, which he has never tried to shirk, which he's always embraced. We have not heard that William has ever wanted to kind of cast off his destiny in the way that you know, for instance, Edward VIII did. Harry's always known that he wasn't going to have that. And in fact, when he said on the Oprah interview, you know, I love my brother to pieces, but we're on different paths now. You know, one wanted to say, well, actually, Harry, you've always been on a different path because you were never on the king's path, which is a wholly different kind of training, acceptance of a kind of constrainment in your own life and so on that you know, he didn't have. So he actually did have more freedom to choose what he wanted to do. I think the only question one has is whether the manner of him choosing it has been for him, you know, something he will one day possibly regret.
I was bringing Andrew on that, this whole second son syndrome and spare to the heir, and this idea that Diana tried to bring them up as equals, but she was kidding herself, wasn't she, Andrew?
Yes, of course. The two life paths are going to be very different, and that basically Harry knew that from the age of sort of 3 or 4. But I think an important aspect of all of this is the choice of a bride. When one looks at Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, one sees instantaneously and very, very straightforwardly a superb Queen of England in the making. And that is because Prince William chose extremely well who he was going to marry. A very, very important choice, of course, perhaps the most important choice he ever makes as a prospective King of England. And the way in which Harry fell in love with Meghan and then married Meghan, decided to leave the royal family and so on. I mean, none of these are the kind of things that a future King of England would be allowed to do. So really, yes, they are entirely different jobs, and they are different personalities. They're both very fortunate that because of Diana, they were both sent to what is ultimately, I think, one of the best schools in the world. It's you know, people can love or hate Eton, but very few will deny that it's an extremely good school. So they got a first-class education in that sense as well. So which wouldn't have necessarily been the case if they'd been sent up to that Scottish borstal up in whatever it's called, Gordonston.
Yes, Prince Charles described it as cold, it's in kilt.
Cold, it's in kilt, exactly. Absolutely. So all in all, I think that that, you know, Princess Diana had a very positive aspect on their education as well.
Keep your comments coming in, folks, watching this. Let me just bring in a couple of really interesting questions here. Tina, I know you'll have a good answer on this because I remember reading it in the book. How do you think the relationship between Charles and Diana would have panned out had she lived?
Well, my feeling is that they were on a very good course at the end, that actually they were beginning to understand each other and rather like each other once it was all settled. Once they were divorced, they could finally become friends. And that was one of the themes of her conversation with me in 1997, was the regret she talked about with Charles, was because she realized, I think, that if only she'd been older, she married him at 1920. She was a child. She didn't understand anything. And she couldn't accept, as men who could, that her husband was in love with somebody else. But I think with the passage of time, she realized that actually they had a lot in common, because she was now a very different woman from the one that he married, from the little girl that he married. She now really shared a lot of what he believed in. The ability to use, your royal position to further the good of humankind was very much what Charles was into. And so actually they used to talk about their causes in a way that was actually quite civilized. And I think it would have become a really quite civilized friendship over the years.
Andrew, do you have any sympathy with this idea, just being reminded of Gordonstoun, and the Queen had wanted, I think, to send Prince Charles to Eton down the road. And of course, Prince Philip insisted he go to Scotland. We've heard Harry talking about this passing on of genetic pain. We have the Queen on a pedestal, but do you think latterly there are going to be criticisms of the way she brought up her children and subsequently how her grandchildren were brought up?
I hope not. No, I think that would be tremendously unfair to her. I think that you mentioned earlier about Harry's certain degree of unpopularity in Britain. And I think a lot of that comes really from the opera interview, and also that disastrous statement that he made after that, in which he seemed to blame the Queen for his father's upbringing, and to make out that it was some kind of a mistake of prison. I can't remember the exact phrase, you'll know it, Camilla, which I think was really trapped. Absolutely. I think it's a tremendously unfortunate choice of words on that occasion of him. And I personally think the Queen is blameless in this. It's not an easy job. She's done it to the best of her ability. And if her husband insisted on their eldest son going to Colditz in kilts, then I don't think that can be blamed on her.
Tina, can you kind of bring us up to speed? Because I think most people watching this will be in the UK, with this American view of both William and Kate on one hand and Harry and Meghan on the other, compared to perhaps feelings in the UK, which may be reversed in terms of their approval rating.
Well, I think actually, though, that William and Kate, people are they like them very much, but they're not nearly as interested in them as they are Harry and Meghan. And Meghan has a huge fan club in the US, without doubt. After the Oprah interview, there was widespread acclaim. Even I think the President Joe Biden actually issued congratulations of some kind about this interview. Everybody spoke in prominent situations to say what a, quote, sort of brave outcry this was, and so on. So that's a very, very different reaction. I think there's a great misunderstanding really in America of really any of the dynamics of the royal family. And it's such a deep thing to try to explain that it's hard to. And people just don't really get the whole kind of British culture of reticence, if you like, and always sort of tend to read reticence as frostiness and coldness. And that's one of the sort of fundamental problems, I think, that it's easy to imagine that the royal family were cold and unwelcoming and unhelpful and all the rest of it. And honestly, we don't really know still what really went down there with Meghan. Something disastrous seemed to have happened. For whatever reason, we're not sure. But it didn't work, and it was oil and water, and it unraveled extremely fast. I mean, astoundingly fast when you consider that. I mean, Diana gave it 17 years after all. And Meghan gave it 20 months,
Andrew, what's your take on Oprah and its ramifications to the royal family?
Well, I don't think it's got quite, it does in America, as Tina says, but I don't think that anything that the Duchess of Sussex said in that interview has any ramifications here in Britain of any significance. I think that she made a series of accusations that she couldn't back up with any evidence. She got enormous numbers of straightforward facts wrong. She seemed to position herself in a almost political way with Oprah, and And I think it was therefore a disastrous interview for her in this country. However, it wasn't in America, as Tina says, and that is ultimately where she's going to be living, maybe where she's going to be pursuing a political career or doing whatever it is that she wants to do. So she was very cannily working out her audience and speaking to it. But that audience was
I
not.
have to say that I think that losing Meghan from the royal family, however, was a tragedy, actually. I mean, I think Meghan could have been a giant asset for the royal family. So it takes two to make a problem. And
it does seem as though, from the latest revelations, that it was Prince William that effectively severed the joint household with Prince Harry after he'd heard the allegations made against Meghan over bullying royal servants. So, there are, as you say, it takes two to tango.
But Tina, is there any sense, there's a few questions along these lines actually in the chat, that you think that Meghan went into the family? I suppose this is also something that's come out of some of the reportage, that she went into the family with an agenda and William spotted it and tried to warn his brother, and that's what caused the divide.
I really don't think that, as a matter of fact. I actually think, Andrew made a very good point about William's choice of Kate Middleton. He made Kate Middleton wait 10 years to get married, right? Not because he wasn't in love with her, or perhaps even would have wanted to marry her before, but I think he really thought that being married into that family, that institution, and that enormous commitment to duty was something that was a very difficult thing to do. And you had to be enormously sure that whoever you married was going to be able to do it, want to do it, and be happy doing it. So I don't think that Meghan had an agenda. I actually don't think that anybody gets married, changes their life, rips up their life, comes to a foreign country with a sense of, I'm going to do this for a bit, and I've got an agenda, and after a bit I'm going to leave. I think that's really a mischaracterization of Meghan, actually. But I think that William was right in that I don't think that she really understood at all what this role was going to be, and I think had a completely sort of misguided, in a sense, notion of what this life was going to be. That this was actually going to be a very difficult and hard call, and she was going to take a long time to like it, and maybe never would like it, because there's a lot not to like, quite honestly, particularly when you're not the number one. You're essentially part of a repertory company of backup royals. Your job is to sort of go and fill the holes and go and do things very often that are just sort of quite dull to a very vibrant, successful, beautiful career woman from California who would think, what am I doing, like playing the sticks when I should be on Broadway? And I think that was really the issue.
Andrew, do you think that the couple can be brought back into the fold? I don't mean that they moved back from America and joined the royal family, but just that there is a sense of repairing damaged bonds. Or equally, I suppose, and most important question is, should the royal family bother?
Gosh, that is a good question. I think they probably should bother because, as Tina said, having a biracial princess basically is a really good thing for the royal family and its look, the diversity of this institution. However, if the price is that you have to jump through every hoop that the Sussexes hold up, then the answer is no. They can, of course, just live in America, a bit like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor lived in France, and have a very nice and productive life, but has essentially nothing to do with the House of Windsor, and that today it looked like there might, especially as Prince Harry spent an entire hour with Prince William, it seems, at Kensington Palace. I mean, it might be the beginning of a reconciliation, which would be wonderful, but it's not to be done at a too high a price. I think that's the way to put it, really.
Tina, what do you think Diana would make of the fact that there are the tensions that we've witnessed over the last year or so between her sons, and how do you think she might have helped them patch things up?
I think that would have made her very, very sad. I think she always saw William and Harry as comforters of each other. She always saw William as Harry's big brother, Harry as the sweet, marvelous, vibrant boy who would need William's help. I think she would be enormously sorry about that, and I think she would have spent a lot of time trying to reconcile the two sons for every reason, actually.
Andrew, do you think that the couple over in America have got the potential to do more damage? Or generally, do you think that the royal family's future is looking assured? I went to an event this week which was marking the Platinum Jubilee, and there was some wonderful footage of the Queen right back to the very beginning of her reign. And it did remind me of, frankly, the absolutely catastrophic impact that her no longer being on the throne is going to have on this country. What are your feelings about the security of the future of the monarchy?
Well, historically, of course, the strength of the royal family is the fact that it is a family, and that every generation is going to be different from the last. That it's a continuing story, that chapters unfold. Yes, of course, the Queen is mortal, but that doesn't mean that the royal family as an institution is going to be damaged 50, 100 years hence. So I agree with you. Of course, it's going to be a terrible day when that happens. But the great thing about a monarchy is that it survives. It goes on to the next generation.
And with that in mind, Tina, and thinking about the fact that Prince Harry's now had his second child, little Lilibet, being born less than a month ago. Obviously, the Cambridges have had George, Charlotte, and Louis. So there is that next generation rising through the ranks. But are there lessons that both brothers can take from the way that they were brought up by both of their parents with regard to how they're going to bring up their own children? Because times have changed, haven't they? And there's different levels of scrutiny, and Harry's given the example that perhaps he can do things a bit differently.
I do think that Archie's going to be the coolest kid in sort of Bel Air High School or wherever it is he's going to be going. I mean, there's going to be these very American cousins, which I think is actually a wonderful sort of cool subplot for the whole House of Windsor. They'll probably, my guess is that George and Charlotte will be kind of rather envious of the kind of fun, because I mean, kids love America, let's face it, they just love it. So I think that you won't be able to keep them out of Montecito probably later. It's probably going to be those children, those cousins, who really in the end bond them all back together, because there's nothing like having those young relationships. I mean, you can see that Harry's actually very close, for instance, to Eugenie and Bea, you know, the Fergies and Andrew's children. And whatever's happened in that horrendous kind of strata of Andrew and the others, the fact is that the cousins are actually very, very close, which I think is a very sort of speaks well for the future, if you like, of this family. And I actually think that they will, in the end, develop a kind of equilibrium between them. And I think that the key moment is going to be when the Queen dies, because I think at that point a great solemnity will fall upon the younger generation. Actually, I think there's going to be the most enormous sort of identity crisis, if you like, for the country when the Queen dies, and the family will pull together in a serious way, realizing that something massive just happened. And I think they will want to support their father as he takes the crown. I think that William will suddenly find, you know, he has the whole Duchy of Cornwall to run, and that he's really quickly now in the running for the succession. And I think it's going to concentrate the minds a great deal of the children in that family.
I've just got one eye on the time, so I'll ask you briefly, Andrew. Obviously, we think of Diana as the chief modernizer, but has the royal family got more modernizing to do if it's going to remain relevant into the 21st century?
Well, I mean, historically speaking, I don't think she was the first modernizer. You know, Prince Philip, in a way, was the person who brought in the royal documentary, allowed the cameras in, established the walkabout along with the Queen. You know, they have been, this is one of the things about the royal family, and why ours is a royal family that survived, whereas so many other royal families throughout the world haven't, is that they are willing to modernize and have actually been modernizing for well over 100 years. You know, the very fact they're called the House of Windsor rather than the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha meant that they shows that they were modernizing back in 1917. So I think that Diana was continuing a trend that will itself continue, and a jolly good thing too, because it has to in order to survive.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your contributions. I can't believe we have whizzed through 45 minutes in what feels like 5, to be perfectly honest. Well, first of all, obviously, I want to thank Tina and Andrew for sparing time and giving your unique insights. They've been absolutely brilliant, and we're very, very grateful for both of your contributions. So thank you. And I suppose all that leaves me to say is thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you once again to our contributors. And all of you have a very good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Camilla.